Montana Territory, early October, 1882. The wind came cold off the mountains that morning, carrying a bite that warned of snow to come. Kade Ashford had just stepped down from his gelding when he spotted her barefoot, clothes dusted in road dirt, arms wrapped tight around herself like she was holding her ribs in place. She stood just outside the barn, eyes fixed on the smoke curling from the chimney of the ranch house. "Ma'am." Kade's voice was low, cautious. He set his saddlebag down and unbuttoned his coat. "You all right?" She turned, brown eyes, wide and tired. Her cheeks were hollowed in a way that told him she had not eaten properly in days. Her hands trembled as she clutched the sides of her dress. "I am just looking for bread," she said quietly. "Anything. I have 2 children. They are waiting by the creek. We have walked too long." Kade blinked. "You walked?" "From Red Lodge," she said. "Nearly 5 days. My name is Roselyn Garner." He reached back into the saddlebag and pulled out the wrapped bundle of his dinner: salt pork, cornbread, and half a baked potato. He crossed the space between them and pressed it into her hands. "Take it," he said. "Eat it now." Her eyes filled. She looked down at the food like it was gold. "I cannot take your supper," she whispered. "You already did," he said gently, "and I do not regret it." She swallowed hard, lips trembling. She tore off a piece of the cornbread and ate like someone who had learned not to hope. Kade watched her, his jaw tightened against the sting in his chest. "My house is not much," he said after a moment, "but it is warm, and my table is empty. My house needs a voice like yours." Roselyn looked up. Her face was streaked with dust and tears. "I do not even know what that means." "It means I do not want you to walk away," he said. "Not you, not your children. You need a place. I have one." Roselyn stared at him like he had spoken magic. But she nodded. Kade saddled up again, riding alongside her as she led him to the creek. There, under a cottonwood tree, sat 2 children, 1 boy, 1 girl, both no older than 6. The girl's name was Violet, the boy's Vincent. They had the same dark eyes as their mother, the same guarded look, like the world had already shown them too much. Kade crouched beside them. "You 2 want to come meet my horse?" Vincent nodded slowly. Violet clutched her mother's skirt, but peeked around it with curiosity. By nightfall, they were all inside the ranch house. Kade stoked the fire higher than usual. Roselyn sat on the floor with her children, her hands running through their hair as they ate warm stew. Kade watched from the kitchen, arms crossed, heart tighter than he liked to admit. He had not expected this when he rode into town that morning. He had gone in for nails and tobacco. He came back with a woman and her children. That night, he laid out blankets in his room for the children and took the spare cot in the loft. As he climbed the ladder, he looked down once more. Roselyn had fallen asleep on the floor beside Violet, one hand resting lightly over her daughter's middle. Her face was soft in sleep, younger somehow. Kade lay back and stared up at the rafters. The wind howled outside, but inside the house was quiet, warm, different, like something had shifted. He had not known her an hour before he gave her his dinner. He had not known her name before he told her to stay. But something about her voice, the way she said, "I have 2 children," like it was both a confession and a promise, it had struck him deep. He had been alone a long time. Too long. And now, maybe, he did not have to be. The next morning, Roselyn stood in his kitchen holding a broom. "You do not need to," Kade began. "I want to," she said. "You gave us your home. Let me make it better." She swept like she meant it, like settling dust mattered. Violet helped him feed the chickens, proudly announcing each egg they found. Vincent followed him to the barn, quiet but determined to carry the hay fork even though it dragged behind him. By noon, the place already felt more alive. Over stew, Roselyn finally looked him in the eye. "My husband died in the mines 2 winters ago," she said. "After that, we went to live with his brother. He drank. He hit my boy." Kade's jaw clenched. "I packed what I could and left," she continued. "We walked. I did not know where we were going. I just knew we had to go." "You did right," Kade said. She nodded, blinking fast. "I thought I might die on the road." "I nearly did." "You did not," he said, "because you were meant to find here." She looked at him, then really looked. And something in her face softened. She reached for his hand across the table, fingers hesitant. "Thank you for the bread," she said. "I would give it again," Kade said. "And more." They sat like that for a while. The children playing on the floor, the fire burning steady, and outside, the wind beginning to whisper of snow. Kade had built the ranch for a life he never got to have. But maybe now, that life was walking toward him on tired feet, carrying 2 children and a voice that made his house feel like home. The first frost came before dawn. Kade woke early, his breath visible as he stepped barefoot onto the plank floor. Downstairs, Roselyn was already tending the hearth, her shawl drawn tight at the neck. The kettle hissed on the hook, and the children rested on the woven rug near the fire, wrapped together in one quilt. "I didn't hear you come down," he said, voice low so as not to wake them. She didn't look up. "I couldn't sleep. My bones still think they're walking. I'll ride into Abzorki today," he said. "Stocks run low. You need anything?" Her hands paused on the kettle's handle. "Thread. We need thread. And vinegar, if you can spare for it." "I'll bring both." He hesitated at the door. She still hadn't turned toward him. The light caught on the curve of her jaw, the way her hair was beginning to curl in the damp warmth of the kitchen. He almost said something else, but she finally looked up. "There's a mended shirt on the peg," she said. "You left it torn 2 weeks ago." He found it folded and clean, the rip along the seam stitched with small, neat patience. He ran his fingers across the seam once, then pulled it over his head. The ride to town was slow, the trail muddy from last night's cold rain. The mare picked careful steps through the low brush. Kade kept one hand on his rifle, though the only thing moving was a pair of mule deer bounding off through the tall grass. In town, he traded a strip of rawhide and a spool of nails for the vinegar. The storekeep, a man who'd known him since his first year on the land, leaned across the counter. "Thought you didn't take company," he said. Kade didn't answer at first. He folded the thread into his coat pocket. "Things change," he said. The man nodded slowly. "That they do." Back at the ranch, Roselyn was in the barn with Violet. They were both crouched beside the henhouse, gathering feathers into a basket. "You sew with feathers now?" Kade asked. Roselyn smiled, not wide, just enough to crease the corners of her eyes. "Vincent's got a hollow in his boot. I'll line it." He handed her the vinegar and thread. She held them like they mattered. He turned to Violet. "Your mama teaching you to mend?" "I already know," she said, lifting her chin. "She showed me with rabbit fur last spring." Roselyn brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's cheek. "She's quick with her fingers. Better than I ever was at her age." Kade watched them both for a moment. Then he looked toward the barn loft. "I've got some hides tucked up there. Elk, mostly. Might make better lining than feathers." "I'll look," Roselyn said. "Thank you." Later that evening, Vincent helped him split kindling behind the house. The boy kept his jaw tight and shoulders squared, mimicking Kade's movements with dogged precision. "You ever split wood before?" Kade asked. Vincent nodded once. "Mama showed me how to swing." He paused. "But I wasn't heavy enough to break it. You are now." They worked until the sun dipped low behind the ridge. Kade handed Vincent the last piece, and the boy tucked it under his arm like a prize. Inside, Roselyn was boiling beans with salt pork. The scent filled the room thick and warm, clinging to the air like comfort. "Your boy's got a steady hand," Kade said. "He's still afraid of loud voices," she said softly. "But he won't be forever." They ate by lamplight. The children talked about the chickens, how one had pecked at Roselyn's hem and startled her. Kade listened, smiled once, and refilled Violet's cup with water from the pitcher. When the children were tucked into their bedrolls, Roselyn lingered at the table, her hands folded in her lap. "You've given us more than a roof," she said. "I don't think I understand why. I didn't plan it," Kade said, "but I don't regret it." She looked down at her hands. "I used to sing. Not on a stage, just at home. For the children. For myself. You could again." Her throat worked on a swallow. "I haven't had reason to." He stood and gathered the dishes. "Maybe now you do." She rose too, slowly, and took the towel from the hook. They washed in silence, passing plates and cups between them. The air smelled of ash and beans, and outside, the wind had settled. When they finished, she didn't go to the children right away. Instead, she stood near the hearth and turned toward him. "I don't know what you expect of me," she said. "I don't expect," Kade said. "I hope." She didn't speak for a long time. Then, quietly, "I think I might begin singing again." He nodded once. "I'd like that." The lamp flickered low. Behind them, the fire crackled, and the world outside the cabin seemed to hold its breath. The snow arrived in the night, blanketing the valley in silence. By morning, the world outside the cabin was white and still, The cottonwood branches bowed under its weight. Kade stood at the window, steam from his coffee rising in curls as he watched the flakes drift, slow and unhurried. Behind him, Roselyn was sewing by the fire, her needle moving with careful rhythm through the hide he'd brought in days before. Violet sat cross-legged beside her, arranging buttons into neat rows on the floor. Vincent was asleep still, curled under the quilt with one arm thrown across his face. "You ever seen snow this early?" Kade asked, not turning from the window. "Not in the lowlands," Roselyn answered. "Up near the ridge, once. But not like this." Her voice was quieter than usual, thoughtful. She tied off the thread, bit it, and leaned back. "I used to dread the cold," she said. "Now, I don't know. It feels like something new instead of something to fear." Kade finally looked at her. Her cheeks were flushed, not from the fire, but from something steadier, being fed, being rested, being safe. She wore her hair braided down her back today, tied with a strip of pale cloth. It made her look younger than she had the day she arrived, though her eyes still held the weight of every hard mile. "I was thinking," he said slowly. "The shed's tight now, but it'd make a good smokehouse with a few changes. Could hang meat in there once the roof's patched." Roselyn set her sewing down. "You planning to salt a full side?" "If I can trade for another hog, yes. Maybe more if the herd calves strong come spring." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I can render fat. My mother taught me before she passed." Kate didn't ask how long ago that had been. He only said, "Then we'll do it together." Violet looked up from her buttons. "Mama, can we hang dried apples too?" Roselyn smiled, eyes soft. "Yes, we can." Later, Kade hitched the sled to the mule and hauled firewood in from the stand of lodgepole pine beyond the hill. Vincent trailed behind him, dragging branches half his height. They didn't speak much, but the boy didn't need prompting. When they reached the chopping stump, Kade handed him the saw. "Try the smaller end," he said. "Let the blade do the work." Vincent crouched low and began cutting, his breath puffing out in short clouds. Roselyn stepped out onto the porch mid-afternoon, her shawl pulled tight. She watched them for a while, and when Kade looked up, she didn't look away. "You get much mail out this far?" she asked. He shook his head. "Only if I ride in. Once a month, if that." She nodded. "I never learned to write properly. Could read some, but not enough to make sense of a letter. My husband, he didn't like books in the house." Kade rested his axe on the stump. "You want to learn?" "I do," she said. She touched her shawl, eyes steady. "I want my children to see me learn something new." "I've got a primer inside," he said, "and a Bible with big letters. We'll start with those." That evening, after the children were asleep, Kade set the book on the table and opened it to the first page. Roselyn sat beside him, her finger tracing the letters. "That's A," he said. "Like apple." She said it softly, repeating after him. Her hand was steady, even as her mouth formed the shapes slow and careful. When she reached the end of the alphabet, she glanced at him. "I never thought I'd want to know these things again," she said. "But I do." Kade closed the book. "You've got time now. No one rushing you." She looked at him then, not with gratitude, but something deeper, recognition. A knowing, quiet thing. Outside, the wind had settled into hush. Snow tapped gently against the window pane, and the fire cast long shadows across the wood floor. Roselyn reached across the table and touched his wrist just once, light as breath. "You were right," she said. "Your house did need a voice." Kade didn't answer. He didn't have to. He only turned his hand, letting her fingers rest in his palm. And for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone in the quiet. By late November, the snow packed hard along the eaves, and the days shortened into long blue dusks. The ranch settled into its winter rhythm, quiet, rhythmic, unhurried. Kade repaired tack by lamplight, while Roselyn stitched wool liners for the children's coats from a frayed blanket she'd found in the loft. The children invented games with pine cones and carved wood scraps near the hearth, their laughter filling the corners of the house like it had always belonged there. One morning, Kade returned from checking the west fence line with a small cedar box tucked under his arm. He set it on the table without a word and hung his coat by the door. Roselyn eyed it, but waited until he joined her near the stove before speaking. "What's that?" "Found it in the shed, buried under a pile of old boards." "Belonged to my mother, I think," he said. "Hasn't been opened in years." Roselyn brushed her hands clean on her apron and lifted the lid. Inside were folded linens, yellowed lace, and a pair of sewing shears wrapped in a faded kerchief. At the bottom, tucked between two lengths of homespun muslin, rested a small leather-bound journal. Kade reached for it, but stopped. I never read it. Roselyn turned the journal in her hands. You want me to? He nodded once. She opened to the first page, her voice quiet but steady. July 3rd, 1854. Rain in the morning, dry by noon. Kade tried to ride the mule again. Fell off, but laughed all the same. She looked up at him, a faint curve at her mouth. You always been stubborn? Didn't know any other way to be. They read a few more entries. The handwriting wavered between crisp and shaky, the ink faded but legible. It was full of days measured by bread baked, animals born, songs hummed to no one in particular. A life kept in the small details, the kind Roselyn understood deep in her bones. When she closed it, she rested her hand on the cover. She sounded kind. She was, Kade said, died before I was grown. Roselyn traced the edge of the book. I think she'd like what you've made here. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, quietly, it wasn't much before you came. That night, after the children were asleep, she stood by the window, watching the snow fall in slow spirals under the moonlight. Kade brought her a mug of warm cider, and she took it without turning. Violet asked me today if this was our home now, she said, voice low. I didn't know how to answer her. What stopped you? I didn't want to speak too soon. I've made promises before I couldn't keep. You didn't promise me anything, he said. Or them? Not yet. She turned then, her eyes shadowed but steady. Do you want me to? He looked at her a long moment, then stepped closer. Only if it's a truth you're ready to carry. She set the mug down on the sill, her hands free now. I think I am. He didn't reach for her not yet, but he didn't move away either. They stood like that, only a breath apart. I don't need a wedding dress or a preacher's blessing to feel something's changed, she said. But I need to know I'm not the only one feeling it. You're not, he said. I've been waiting for the right shape to the days. They have it now. You gave it to them. She breathed in, slow. Then yes. This is our home now. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the weight of their days, of the space they'd made for one another without ever naming it outright. He finally lifted his hand and rested it gently against her waist. She didn't flinch. Her hand found his, fingers lacing. Outside, the wind pressed soft against the walls, and the snow kept falling, quiet and sure, sealing the world in stillness. Inside, they stood together, no longer waiting. The snow held through December, piling higher each week until the fence rails wore white caps and the fields lay buried under a silent hush. The work slowed but never stopped. Kade spent long mornings in the barn, oiling harnesses and rechecking the grain stores, the cold biting at his fingers even through wool gloves. In the afternoons, Roselyn practiced her letters by lamplight, tracing each one slow and careful, her lips moving without sound. Violet had taken to copying the shapes beside her, while Vincent carved a small horse from a piece of pine Kade had cut down during the last thaw. One afternoon, Kade found Roselyn in the lean-to behind the kitchen, her hands red from scrubbing clothes in a basin of melted snow. He stepped in and leaned against the doorway, watching the steam rise from the water. You could have waited for a warmer day, he said. She rolled a sleeve back, wiping her forehead with her wrist. The longer I wait, the more it piles up. He crossed the space between them and took the next shirt from the basin. Then let's do it together. They worked side by side in silence, the rhythm of wringing and rinsing filling the air between them. When they finished, she hung the shirts on the line strung in the attic, teeth chattering from the cold that had settled in her sleeves. You'll catch chill, he said as they came back down. Her breath shivered out of her. I've had worse. He poured her a tin of warmed cider from the kettle and watched her wrap her hands around it, color returning to her fingers. The wind rattled the shutters once, then quieted again. The walls held firm. That evening, after the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Roselyn sat on the edge of the table bench, one foot tucked beneath her. Kade was sharpening his knife, slow strokes over the whetstone. She watched the blade catch the firelight before she finally broke the silence. I've been thinking about keeping chickens come spring. Not just for eggs. I could raise some for trade. He looked up. You'd take on all that. I've known how to break a neck and pluck feathers since I was a girl. I can salt the meat, sell it in town. Maybe put back enough for cloth and sugar. He set the knife aside. You don't need to earn your place here. Her gaze didn't waver. I know, but I want to build something that's mine too. He nodded, slow. Then I'll help you build it. Her face softened at that, not with surprise, but with quiet understanding. She reached for the knitting basket on the floor and began a row, her fingers steady in the flickering light. Did you ever think you'd end up with someone? She asked. He took a breath before answering. Not after my father died. I figured I'd age out of it. Got used to the quiet. Then one day it didn't feel like peace anymore. Just hollow. She set her needles down. I know that hollow. He met her eyes. It's gone now. She stood and crossed the room, her hands brushing his shoulders before settling at the back of his neck. He rose slowly, as if afraid to shift the moment. Their foreheads touched first, breath mingling. Then her mouth found his tentative, then sure. He wrapped his arms around her back, pulling her close, the firelight catching the edges of her hair. They didn't speak after. Words had done their part. By late winter, the snow began to retreat in patches, revealing the shape of the world again. The children helped scatter seed for the early greens. Kade rebuilt the coop wall that had splintered in the last storm. Roselyn packed dried beans into jars, her face flushed with sun for the first time in months. One clear morning, he found her sewing in the light that fell across the window. She was stitching a simple hem into a dress the color of storm clouds. Where'd you come by that cloth? He asked. I traded for it with the last of my lavender soap, she said. Felt right to have something new. He watched the thread pull tight. You planning to wear it somewhere? She didn't look up. Here. At home. When it's time. Time for what? She tied the thread off and met his eyes. To marry you. He stepped toward her, slow and steady. You're sure? I've been sure since the night we read your mother's journal. He took her hand and pressed it to his chest. Then let's not wait on anyone's permission but our own. They were married in the clearing near the barn, under the cottonwoods just beginning to bud. Violet wore a garland of dried summer blooms Roselyn had kept tucked away in a ribbon box. Vincent stood beside Kade, holding the ring carved from ashwood and softened with beeswax. The vows were plain, spoken without flourish. No preacher, no crowd, just the four of them and the wind moving gently through the trees. That night, after the children had gone to bed and the lantern burned low, Roselyn lay with her head on Kade's chest, her hand resting lightly over his heart. I never thought I'd be allowed to feel safe again, she whispered. You're not just safe, he said. You're home. She tilted her face up. And you? He kissed her forehead, then her mouth. I've been waiting for you longer than I knew. Outside, the stars hung low and clear. The wind softened to a hush, no longer cold, but carrying the scent of thaw and earth. In the quiet warmth of the house they'd made together, no part of the past reached in. No more roads to walk, no more nights to survive. Only days ahead. By the second spring, the coop held twice the hens, and Roselyn's preserves filled the shelves in neat rows. Violet started reading aloud from the Bible with steady voice, and Vincent carved a new horse, this one with a saddle, finer shaped. The house grew fuller, not with things, but with living. With laughter in the kitchen, with the scrape of chairs pulled close, with warmth in every corner that once held only dust. And on quiet nights, when the fire burned low and the windows opened to the soft dark, Kade would hold her close and listen to her hum low and steady, a tune without words, the kind you only sing when you've found your way home.